Greetings, Dr. Mark Winton here from the University of Central Florida Department of Criminal Justice. I'd like to talk a few minutes about hate crimes and evil. We've studied a variety of different types of hate crimes. We've focused on some theories. We've looked at some of the research findings regarding the extent of hate crimes, if you will, the epidemiology of hate crimes. And now as we begin to move toward the end of the semester, we really want to put everything together. In this particular video and the associated PowerPoint, I asked the question, how do you judge the evilness of a hate crime? What criteria do you use? What indicators do you use? How do you decide? Do you simply say it's evil or not evil, or are there some ways to look at the extent or the intensity or the degree or level of evilness? And think about some familiar cases and how they differ in their levels of evilness. And do you think others would agree with you, with your analysis? And how would you make this type of assessment of evilness more objective, especially for the court system? Now, if we step back for a few minutes and we go back to looking at some theories, I'd like to mention Professor Becker from 1975 from his book Escape from Evil, and he has several books out that focus on evil. And Becker talked about the idea that scapegoating is used to discharge humans' evil side and to reaffirm power and survival. And in another domain, we could say, let's say that scapegoating brings people together. Or I should say, brings specific groups of people together, those doing the scapegoating. And also Becker pointed out that a group may create evil to destroy it, which also has a self-esteem enhancing effect. And Becker believes that all of this is really related to the human fear of death. So he has some other writings on this as well. But I just wanted to bring that up to kind of think about theories that we haven't really covered at this point, but may be relevant in thinking about evil and hate crimes and how we think about this. Also, Dr. Baumeister, in his book Evil, Inside Human Violence and Cruelty, published in 1999, the second edition, believes that there are four basic causes of evil. One is material gain. The second is threatened egotism. The third is idealism. And the fourth is the pursuit of sadistic pleasures. He also believes that people who engage in evil have high levels of self-esteem, not low levels, which we often hear about. Well, the person has low level of self-esteem, but high levels self-esteem. They think too highly of themselves. So I think that's something to think about as well. And then also, I put in the PowerPoint just two slides from Bandura, Caprera, and Laszlo's 2000 article, Corporate Transgressions Through Moral Disengagement, from the Journal of Human Values, pages 57 to 64, because they talked about corporate transgressions and the abuse of power. But I think some of those factors are so relevant if we're studying hate groups and if we're studying organizations or businesses that associate with hate groups or support hate groups. They talk about the abuse of power in terms of moral justification, euphemistic labeling, advantageous comparisons, the displacement of responsibility, the diffusion of responsibility, the disregard or distorting of the consequences, the dehumanization, and also the attribution of blame. So these are also some of the areas we would see also when we talked earlier about Motz and Sykes' techniques of neutralization. In essence, kind of excuses, if you will. And we can think about how different groups and organizations use these excuses, these justifications, when they engage in abusive behavior. Now back to the original purpose of this video is to try to put together a method of qualifying and quantifying, let's say, evil for the court system. Well, for many years, Dr. Wellner has been working on the depravity scale. And I will be using Dr. Wellner's work on classifying crimes by severity from aggravators to depravity, pages 55 to 72, published in 2006 in J.E. Douglas, A.W. Burgess, A.G. Burgess, and R.K. Ressler's Crime Classification Manual, the second edition. I know now that the Crime Classification Manual is out in their third edition, but I have the second edition here and the PowerPoints. And basically, Dr. Wellner wanted to try to figure out how criminal punishment in the courts would or could consider aggravating and mitigating factors. For example, perpetrator intent, actions, attitude toward the crime, and victimology. And there are some excellent YouTube videos on the depravity scale, and also you can see some of the more recent research published in 2018 on the validation, reliability studies, and application of the depravity scale. Now, focusing on evil, what is considered depraved behavior? Who is an evil person in that sense? And that's really, according to Wellner, for mental health or theological professionals to decide. But what we want to decide on what would be considered a depravity in that situation. And Dr. Wellner suggests that we classify using a low, medium, or high depravity-based standards. So low, medium, or high. Others may want to use some kind of ordinal scale. I'm sorry, not ordinal scale, but a more interval-related scale, and begin to look at if you can actually attach some specific numbers here. I'm not going to go into the actual classification system there. Like I said, they're using an ordinal scale, low, medium, or high, but do we want to come up with a scale that has maybe a range from, let's say, 0 to 10, or 0 to 100 for that matter? That's still up for discussion. So some of the items, or I should say the items under studying the depravity standard, are very relevant to discussing what we consider to be evil. So I'm just going to mention these briefly, and then you can think about how you'd apply these to some different hate crimes for comparative purposes. The intent to emotionally traumatize. Does the perpetrator intend to emotionally traumatize the victims? The intent to maximize damage or destruction. The intent to cause permanent physical damage. The intent to carry out crime primarily for excitement. Carrying out crime for attention or acceptance. Carrying out crime to terrorize. Intentionally targeting victims based on prejudice. Targeting helpless victims, carrying out crime in trusted relationships, having an extreme response to trivial event, carrying out an attack when in unnecessarily close contact, indulgence of actions, unusual quality of suffering of the victim, and prolonging the victim suffering. Also, unrelenting physical and emotional attack, exceptional degree of harm or damage, influencing criminality in others to avoid the penalties, influencing depravity in others to destroy more, and falsely implicating others. And continuing on, disregard for the victim's feelings, satisfaction or pleasure in response to actions, projecting responsibility onto the victim, disrespect to the victim after the fact, and indifference to actions or their impact. So I think in this scenario, Dr. Wellner has constructed with his colleagues a method that can be used in cases of hate crime to judge the evilness, especially for the court system, but also the research, practical applications of this depravity standard, I think, are really going to be useful in current research on hate crimes and into the future as well. I have not formally applied the depravity standard to hate crimes that you find in our textbook. What's not in our textbook, what's not discussed really in this class, but certainly would qualify as a hate crime, is genocide. I did apply this model, the depravity standard, to two perpetrators were involved in a genocide, and came to very different conclusions. And it was not based on how many people the perpetrator actually killed, but it was based on a lot of the actions, thoughts, activities in the depravity standard. So I think this may be a very useful model to begin to apply to perpetrators in a variety of violent criminal activities. I also wanted to mention a few things about trauma, and I almost thought, well, maybe I should just make a whole different video on trauma, but I think it's important to also look at group trauma, which we see in hate crimes. And Jeffrey Alexander edited a book, Toward a Theory of Cultural Trauma, and published it in 2004 by University of California Press. And Dr. Alexander has an article in this volume, pages 1 through 30, Toward a Theory of Cultural Trauma. And Jeffrey Alexander on page 1 states, cultural trauma occurs when members of a collectivity feel they have been subjected to a horrendous event that leaves indelible marks upon their group consciousness, making their memories forever and changing their future identity in fundamental and irrevocable ways. And so what I begin to think about here is, how do we address the post-trauma that occurs in hate crimes? How do we repair a society that produced a variety of hate crimes? And how do we prevent further violence from occurring after a series of hate crimes? I also have some information in the presentation on post-traumatic stress disorder and stress in the brain and the community, but I'm not going to cover that in this particular video. But I do want to mention and then begin to think about tying this in. Today's date is November 1st, 2018, and as you know, we just saw a horrific event at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where we saw 11 people worshiping at their synagogue murdered in a mass shooting and others injured. And we've been talking about this, or we've seen this in the press. Of course, I wonder if the depravity standard would be successfully applied to the perpetrator. I think he would rate very highly as a highly evil, depraved individual, but using that criteria. I also wondered, going back to the data about anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic incidents. So I pulled the ADL, which is mentioned in your textbook a number of times, looking at some reports 2016 to 2017 that the organization identified an increase of 57% incidents that were reported to them. Now, of course, remember, we're talking about reporting. So what this means, people reporting, that we always ask, well, are we more likely to have reports coming in, or is it the similar, or is it lower level of reports coming in? So this is difficult to judge how much anti-Semitism has changed from the previous year. But it's a major problem, no doubt. They divided the incidents into three categories. Harassment is one category, vandalism is another, and then assault is the third category. They found that there were large increases in harassment and vandalism, and they also found that there is a decrease in assaults, 2016-2017. They also found that anti-Semitic incidents were increasing in the K through 12 schools, as well as in the college and universities. So this certainly is something that needs further attention. And finally, to wrap up, and again, even the week before, we saw the pipe bomb threats occur and another perpetrator arrested, and we can see how he would rank or fall on the depravity standard. We can do that, and we can compare and contrast other perpetrators as well who have engaged in hate crimes. If you go online and you last time I checked, these articles were freely available from the Journal of Criminal Justice, and Wellner and his colleagues published 3 articles on the depravity standard, 1, 2, and 3. And so if you look in the Journal of Criminal Justice online, they still might have those available. Hopefully they do. And those articles really kind of update us on what I think is an extremely useful tool to use in forensic settings, to use in the court room, and to use in general in research. So I hope I see more attention and focus. And of course, with our other work, we want to figure out how to prevent these from happening, and that of course is another presentation in itself. But I think just kind of trying again, going back to some theory, going back to some methodologies and some research, and trying to classify evil. It's difficult to understand. Often the complexity makes it difficult to discuss at any length. Unfortunately, many press depictions provide only a limited amount of discussion from those that are being interviewed or discussing, the situation. And so this wraps up this video.